This year, last year it was 2 planes, any 2. This year, I'm pushing 3 planes. Out of the infinite variety of planes, I'm just pushing 3. One is what we would call the ego plane, and that will include the physical, mental, and emotional bodies. Then we'll call the second one the soul plane, and that will include the way in which you are a somebody awareness. You're still somebody. You are an entity with unique karma. And the third plane is the plane of pure awareness, which is really not a plane, but we'll use the word planes now. We could use spheres, but we'll just use planes for fun. Don't think that planes mean higher is better. They're just different from one another. So if I were to review our storyline thus far from, let's say, the soul's point of view, the middle level, I would say I had some business to do, which we will call karma, psychic DNA, some ill-digested attachments, aversions and attractions. And that karma led to the manifestation of me in a physical form. In other words, I took birth in an incarnation. And when I was born, I was still fully out there, with my karma to run through, of course. But that karma involved a certain experience of socialization. And in that process, I knew ultimately of my separateness. I experienced my separateness from God or from all or from something. In other words, I began to get attached to the form in which I had manifested. I'm now speaking as a soul. Now, as I get sort of encrusted into a form, there is a kind of a moment of incredible fear when the form starts to solidify enough so there's a boundary, so there is a form and other. There is and other. You pinch your toe and you pinch the bedpost and they're different, and you keep pinching and pinching and pinching and pinching, and you're learning that's me and that's not me, or something like that. Now, it can be as early as when you get born, when you leave the womb. It could be that separation. Or it could be the separation when you first experience sucking and there's no milk coming. That is, when you experience the separateness so that the universe isn't all one thing anymore. There's an awareness that there's something separate. You have separated. And you have gotten caught in a part of the universe rather than the awareness you are the whole universe. So you have, what Gurdjieff talks about, been imprisoned by your own mind in some way. I mean, this is the mind that's done this. Because the hunger was so strong and it wasn't being fulfilled and there was pain, and these learnings are very deep when there is an emotional component to them. And most of us got very deeply socialized into being somebody, into our incarnation. That whole mechanism is something that is like software in the system, and it has to be developed. You develop the software, and that happens through your DNA code, through your socialization process, through all the people you meet and talk to. But notice an interesting thing, that your whole sense of separateness is really rooted from some uncomfortable experience of being separate. In other words, you didn't jump into separateness as a celebration for the most part. You were kind of pushed into separateness. Maybe you would have jumped a moment later, and maybe you did jump, and that's just the experience you had was one of pushing against it. As you obviously did, and I did. The other day, when I was thinking back over all of this in my life, I can experience that the power of my mother to deliver milk to me and keep me fulfilled, dry and warm and loved. I traced how the separation from my ability to be that, so that I got into separateness, so that I tried to control it. So as soon as you become somebody, you get into a power thing, because as a somebody, as a baby, you're awfully little. And the forces around you are very big. And so I somehow experience in myself, having experienced the pain of separateness and having not the power to control that I couldn't get what I wanted when I wanted it, once I became a somebody who wanted something. And I only became the somebody who wanted something because I didn't have what I wanted all the time. I hadn't even had a want up until then. I had to learn wants, by the way. I wanna. And it really, most of my life, from all my education, because these were all surrogates for that power person that held the control of my being. And I developed, as you did, incredible skills of looking into other people's eyes to know who you were. Am I good? Am I enough? Am I achieving? Am I successful? Am I beautiful? Am I fulfilling? Am I attractive? Am I smart enough? Whatever judgmental thing you imposed on yourself. And I on myself. And I kept trying to be satisfied all the time through various things. But notice how all of my separateness was built on relationship. My relationship with my mother, with my father, with my surrogates, with all of the things that then became so on. And how much the whole web of what I call my ego is basically relational. So, for example, I'm working on the field of aging now, unconscious aging. And what I notice is the karmic effect of that in old people when they end up feeling lonely, isolated, lack of self-respect, That's the whole chronicle of things that are primarily relational things. And they are suffering because of them, because of their identification with that. And as you know my story, I guess I would have continued to be that somebody, having then been trained, as you know, in somebody's specialness, just like you were. So we aren't just somebody, we're somebody special. And then we all go around being somebody special, and we form relationships based on our specialness and their specialness. And we look for symbiosis around our specialness. And it's all very dramatic. It's all as the world turns, and it's all so poignantly, beautifully horrible. And so thick, and everybody's in it right up to their eyeballs. Does she, does he, will they, won't they, can I, can't I, what will he think if I do? Oh, yeah. Hello, goodbye, I miss you, I love you, go away. It's all relational stuff. I mean, you just look at your language, your concepts, all of it. It's so thick. You keep saying, I want to be alone. Don't kid yourself. You don't want to be alone. You wouldn't exist. Funny way, you only exist relationally at that level. It's the funny thing about the ego, how deeply it is in relationships. And that's why I got interested in what happened in the 60s, when was a certain thing culminated that was kind of bubbling around in the history of the culture, which was the undivided loyalty to individualism. After fascism and communism, we got into individualism. A new ism. What's in it for me? Am I growing? Who am I? What do I need? What do I want? What do I desire? Almost a worship of our somebodyness. I have a right to be somebody. And that came out of years of feeling you didn't. of carrying around the feeling I'm powerless and something I'm wrong because I'm not the whole universe like I used to be, which you experienced as a baby. It must be incredibly painful. The moment not just of physical birth, but of psychological birth, of the experience of separateness as an entity when you have been the whole thing. I've described in many lectures and on tape, and I can't do the whole story, but the experience in Hawaii with that community of meditators in Hawaii, where finally they had pushed me to my limits, and they all had their hands on my body, and I was screaming and screaming and screaming as to their orders. And suddenly I was back in a crib in my room at home, and I was screaming the same way. And my mother was holding me down, just had her hand on my chest. I was having a temper tantrum, obviously, of some sort. And she was just being a good mother. She wasn't giving way to it. She wasn't reinforcing temper tantrums, which you didn't do in those days. Later you did. And look what happened. But she didn't, and she wasn't out of like I'm a mean mother. She was just calming me down, but it was firm. And the firmness had a resistance to my power. I couldn't control the situation anymore. And the experience was one of loss of power. And when I look at business, and I look at government, and I look into the personalities of all of the politicians, and don't you see all that fear, and don't you see all that sense of not being powerful enough, and that if I had the power, it would all be all right? We are caught in a drama so thick of ego structures, ego constructs that have come out of our intellectual extrapolations from our basic root conceptual models of who am I and how the world works, which has to do with fear, it has to do with feelings of pain of separateness, it has to do with power, it has to do with a yearning to come back to a certain feeling at home in the universe, at home, at one. And I think most of what we live with in politics, in business, in most of our professions, most of our lifestyles, deeply, deeply, deeply emerged in these particular conceptual plane of reality that everybody conspires to see as real. Like in the book I'm doing with aging, it's absolutely amazing how this society conspires to define what aging is and then sucks everybody into believing it's true, and then they live it out. And it's a hype. It is a complete hype. It's a creation of mind. So that if you look at aging, in almost all the literature, it is seen as a problem. That's the first one. Isn't that bizarre? You know, it's like the leaves turn red in the fall and you say, we got a problem. Let's get out there with a green can and paint them all green. What the hell? We can't have these leaves turning red. What's that about? I mean, it's so absolutely bizarre. Bizarre. The first thing you have to realize is you're in prison. You've been had. You bought into a conceptual model that you got trained into from birth to deal with your separateness, and it's a whole structure that you've invested with reality. And from your point of view, it's the only reality most of the time. When my father would say, Richard, come back to reality, that's the one he meant. Now, where are all the other planes of reality when we're so busy investing in this one rather uninteresting plane? It's not uninteresting, it's actually passionately beautiful, but it's also uninteresting. If it's your only one, it's a very sparse, it's like not having cable. But the minute you realize you are in prison, that's the relative reality perception. You realize you got a problem. You realize there's more than one channel. You realize there's another place from which to look. However you want to say it, you understand the theory of relativity. You understand that everything is real depending on where you're looking at it from. Just like you dreamt last night, and in that dream, that stuff was real. And you woke up, and then you said, I woke up into what? I mean, you ultimately must realize you just woke up into another one of them. Didn't the one you were in last night seem real? Didn't it seem like you were in a hall with all those people? And then you woke up and they're all gone. Still here. Long dream. And once I had realized that I was in prison, which is what my first mushroom trip absolutely ascertained for me with certainty, or as certain as relative reality can get. I look back at all the years in which I had taken it all so, quote, seriously, and I thought, didn't I have any clues any of those years? I mean, did I go 30 years without a clue that I was caught in some weird psychosis, group psychosis? At that time, I didn't quite see it. Over the years, I began to see that as my vision of where I was looking from changed, then a number of things that had been in the background in my life started to come out as figure, and things that were figures started to recede into background, and suddenly I could see that there was a web of that information and that wisdom available, but I was busy not seeing it because of the intense nature of the plane I was seeing. The interesting example of that predicament was the one in which my guru said to me on the second time I saw him after the first day he told me how my mother had died. The second day he said, your mother is a great saint. And I said, didn't Maharaji say was a great saint? And the translator asked Maharaji said, no, is a great saint. And she was dead, so she was a dead great saint. So what was that? And what I experienced at the moment he said that was the realization that my mother wasn't who I had thought she was. That I had trapped her in being that Jewish middle class, nurturing, very responsible mother. And that was just who she had incarnated as. And he was saying she's a great being. And suddenly, at that moment, there was a figure ground reversal, and the very few, maybe 4 or 5 times in our life that I could remember, when there had been that reversal and where we had recognized one another as fellow beings. One example that I always use is she and I were coming back from the dentist. I was maybe 9 or so, and we came to a stoplight, and we were playing a game to see who could hold a note the longest. And we were both screaming at the top of our lungs. And we looked over, and there was a man in the next car looking at us as if we were both completely insane. And there was a moment when our whole game of mother and child dissolved into the hate of the moment. And at that moment, we were outside of our roles for a moment and then back in. And those were so few, and yet they had existed. And it's interesting, after he said that, ever after, that's who she and I have been with one another. And all that other stuff has disappeared or dissolved into the ground. And it's why I say to people when they're grieving, you're grieving for all the forms of the incarnation. But why you're grieving is because you connected with love to the deeper nature of the other person. And when you stop filling your mind with your self-pity, anger, hope, fear, wishing, and quiet, you experience nothing happened. Nobody went anywhere. It is merely because I've measured you in terms of your forms. I've reduced you into form. And now you're dead and you up-leveled me. You said, find me now. Go ahead. You really love me? Find me. And you keep wanting the form back, because that's the one that turns you on. But ultimately, you have to turn on from somewhere else. Otherwise, you're always desperate for external rushes. So the awakening is an awakening, could be said to be, I mean, the word awakening is used in the spiritual literature, could be said to be the moment when you realize you're in prison. The moment when you experience another reality. The moment when you see there are other ways of looking at it all. I mean, really other. Really other. I'm not talking about other places in your thought process, but other. Now, what you call that place from which you look at your life when before you were just busy thinking you were it, your incarnation life, where do you look at it from? And that's where we're using the word soul, which could, at the deepest levels of the use of the word witness, could be that, but usually it isn't. Now let's look at the soul's predicament. The soul had some karma to work out, took an incarnation, got lost in the incarnation, and then starts to awaken and realize that it has just taken an incarnation, and it had to get lost and go through the whole process of awakening for the incarnation to work out the karma. This is not an error in the system. The predicament with the word soul is that it's got all kinds of Christian overlay. I guess it's got Jewish overlay and probably every other religious overlay too. I don't mean to lay it on the Christians. Just that they are so soulful. And actually, that's because that plane is a wonderful leverage plane to get able to see the plane you've been stuck on. It's a very useful plane. It's like a step in a ladder, and it allows you to take your pressure off your foot on the lower rung because you're on the middle rung. So that you could say that one of the ways of awakening is you awaken to realize you are a soul that has been lost for quite a while in an incarnation, which you created, or which is the manifest of what your karma needs. It's all fine, there's no errors, it's just interesting. Oh my God, have I been had? I'm not that being at all. And the experience of the awakening of the soul, which one is not just the awakening, because with my mother-in-law, we were awakening into that place of just being two beings sharing the peculiarity of the predicament we found ourselves in as incarnates. Like, as Golem said, what are we doing here where this is real? What are we doing stuck in this place where it's real? That's the lazy man's guide to enlightenment. So, from the soul's point of view, as you start to awaken, you see the way in which the incarnation sticks to you as you're sort of shaking it off, like shaking off water or stuff like that. Now, there's a tendency, because you've been trapped in the incarnation for so long, when you awaken, to see it in negative terms. It trapped me, it's thick, it's heavy, it's something, and you push against it. And that's called, it's like the renunciate path. I just won't think of rhinoceros, you know. I just will push away life, and then I will push away incarnation, and then I will soar as a soul. In other words, I want to get high and I want to push away the low. And low and high are still seen as value things, that higher is better than lower. Higher, I feel connected to the universe, I feel I'm in my soul. Lower, I come down back into my psychodynamic, social, physical, somebody specialness. Trapped back here again. From the soul's point of view, the curriculum of the soul has two components to it. They're really interesting. It's the middle level, remember now. First of all, it's working with its incarnation. And it sees ultimately that Buddha was absolutely right on. that the clinging of mind, the attraction and the aversions of mind are what juice the whole system and the suffering and the whole shtick. So the soul is using the experiences of incarnation to get lost in, then to awaken out of, to see one's predicament, and to get to the point where one can be, as Christ said, in the world but not of the world. You are not pushing away your incarnation because that's an aversion. And you can't afford any aversions anymore, because aversions are from the ego level. The soul doesn't have aversions. The soul just sees aversions and attractions within the ego. Every time you're identified with an attraction or an aversion, you're identified with your ego. So the job of extricating oneself into one's soul is slowly cultivating those qualities which allow you to see the whole process and to calm yourself into realizing that your incarnation is about extricating yourself from attractions and aversions so that you are not lost in incarnation anymore. But it doesn't mean pushing against it, as you'll soon find out in the horny celibate period. Because if you push against it, it still got you. The game is to go beyond that into the point where you are fully in the world and fully not in the world. There are stages where you get into your soul where you say, oh, I miss the passions of life. Meaning the passions, the excitements that were caused by being lost in it. And you think, I'll never have those again. I'll never have my first romance. I'll never have this and I'll never have that. Because those were so adrenaline rushy, heady stuff. You must remember. And that's a lot like what is often called the dark night of the soul, where you have sort of realized that you're not going to have the intensity of the excitement that came from being totally lost into the linear drama and not knowing how it comes out. It all comes out the same. It all turns back into whatever it is. That's the nature of the transitory nature of phenomena, whether you like it or not. The soul is unique. It has its unique karma. It's working it out through incarnation. As it awakens to its own existence, it starts to shed the attractions and the aversions that had it stuck and closed down into the prison of incarnation. It awakens, so now the soul is present and the incarnation is unfolding. Its storyline is continuing. Ram Dass is continuing. Its story goes on. Hello, how are you? Yes, I'll do that. Hello. Good evening, this is Ram Dass. That's all the storyline. And slowly, more and more, behind it is just, wow, look at that one. Mild curiosity at first. That's a subtle attachment. Fascination. My, you wouldn't have believed that, would you? The synchronicity was appalling. And then you get to the point of, and then the point of it's all precious. See, you can't experience the all precious, beautiful yum, yum, yum of the beloved as long as you're afraid of being trapped by it. You've got to get through your original reaction to the trauma of what you've been through of being trapped. When the soul wakes up, it's like, oh, I mean, it's very shaky. Very shaky. It isn't, of course, but it thinks it's shaky. So now when somebody says, I have a special relationship with you, the question is, do souls have special relationships? Egos certainly do. Souls are working out their stuff through ego special relationships. But the question is, do you want to identify with a special relationship, or do you want to identify with a soul? And if it's a soul, we just, you here, I'm here, hi. Well, what have we got to do? Well, this time we'll just wave. No, this time you be my father and I'll be your child. No, this time let's be competitors. Okay. And the mature relationships that we develop when you work on yourself deeply enough, and you meet another person who is working on themselves deeply enough, is we meet just as you here, I'm here. And then if we have a dance to do, we dance. And if we don't have a dance to do, we don't dance. But the dance or the not dance doesn't matter to either of us. And yet we love each other deeply. Deeply. And I don't mind really playing with different ones of you in these different ways as if it really matters. But it's much more fun if you also realize it doesn't matter. Much more fun. The game is much higher. And I keep saying to everybody, hey, play it a different way. Come on out. It's like having a ball bouncing outside at sunset, and everybody's got their nose pressed against the window saying, we can't come out. Mother said it's too late. We can't come out. And I'm just waiting for somebody to come out and play. And most of you, we play for moments, and then people go back into stuff. And I go back into stuff, and that's our work, is to extricate ourselves from having to look at how we are with each other as egos rather than as souls. And I think it's a confusion, the term soulmates. I mean, I can understand it. I can see souls traveling together through series of incarnations because they have work to do. Most of the people that use the word soulmate do it from an ego level. And there's a whole way of describing spiritual planes from ego that is really basically ego stuff. And a lot of the New Age movement is that. It is basically an ego ripoff of spiritual concepts by people who still want power because they are rooted in fear. The soul isn't rooted in fear. The soul is doing fine. And when Maharaji said to me, Ramdas, don't you see it's all perfect? He was saying, hey, couldn't you come up for air for a second? You know, couldn't you come out and play a little bit? And I'm saying, no, it's real. Damn it, it's wrong. It's bad. There's good and there's evil, and this is evil. And he's saying, we'll wait. You know, he's flipping through the deck of incarnations and seeing that about 100,000 incarnations down the line, I will say, oh, God, you were high. But he's in no rush. Where's he going to go? I mean, when souls look at people who are busy being egos, just realize how poignant it all looks. How poignant it all looks. And you love the person, but you love the soul, and the storyline is so poignant. But my storyline's poignant. I mean, my storyline's no more interesting to me than yours is to me. It's all vitally interesting. It is, and it's all empty. I'll give you vital if you'll allow empty. If you don't buy empty, you can't have vital. See, if you don't understand what I'm saying, you've got two choices. Either I'm insane or you are. And I haven't the faintest idea. I wish I could help you. Because it seems real to me, what I'm saying to you. So good luck. The fun is that when the hubbub and clamor of ego entrapment gets lightened, and I mean lightened so that you're not pushing against it, but so you're really in it, but you're not caught in it. Like taking care of my father through the years of his last years was going from being caught in doing it from one level, which was ego level, slowly to extricating until we were souls just completing the business of ego and incarnation together. So as it gets lighter, not through avoidance, but lighter through harmoniously fulfilling one's dharma, fulfilling one's stuff on earth, doing what your thing is, hearing your uniqueness and manifesting, just not getting caught in it. As you get lighter into all of that, then the soul's initial business comes to light, which is its relationship to the one, or to the non, well, no words, what the finger's pointing at. The finger of religion points at something. It's the mystery. It's the relation of the soul to the mystery. And that ultimately is the only game in town. That's the language of the mystic poetry. It's the language of the soul yearning to be with God, to be in God, to be one with what is, to be beyond boundary, to ultimately rend the strings that keep a boundary between something and something else. In other words, it's to become in love, which is boundaryless. It is to die into love. And what's happened, if you notice the sequence, is you went from one into soul. Soul took birth into separate caughtness. Separateness awakes to soul. And then when soul is in harmony, got its act together, then soul's yearning for the coming back out of its own ultimate separateness that's created by the karmic structure of it all, then it starts to come back into the one. And that yearning is the call towards the beloved. And many of you know, because I've read this at almost every retreat, these words from Anandamayi Ma. She said, this body has lived with father, mother, husband, and all. This body has served the husband, so you may call it a wife. It has prepared dishes for all, so you may call it a cook. It has done all sorts of scrubbing and menial work, so you may call it a servant. But if you look at the thing from another standpoint, you will realize that this body has served none but God. For when I served my father, mother, husband, and others, I simply considered them as different manifestations of the Almighty and served them as such. When I sat down to prepare food, I did so as if for God. Whatever I did in a spirit of divine service. Hence, I was not quite worldly, though always engaged in household affairs. I had but one ideal, to serve all as God, to do everything for the sake of God. Now, can you hear? There's the whole ego storyline going. Bengali woman, wife, does it all. But she's on the level of soul, doing her life as an offering to bring her to the beloved. When Hanuman is with Ram, and Ram says to Hanuman, who are you, Hanuman? And Hanuman says, when I don't know who I am, I serve you. When I know who I am you. Okay? Now we're talking about the second and the third planes that I'm asking you to consider. Because the second plane is the soul, and you and I are fellow souls that have taken incarnation, and we're meeting in this room in Marin, with our storylines coming from distances, all of our life stuff. And we're souls coming to meet as it's a convention. It's a party of souls. It's a party of souls. And we're meeting each other through our psyches and personalities and stuff. But behind it, we're laughing. Far out. What happened to you this trip? Well, I really had. You should have seen the... My God, what happened in my childhood, you wouldn't believe. I've been milking it for 30 years. I'm a fierce player, by the way. Don't make friends with an elephant trainer unless you have room for an elephant in your living room. That's a great Hindu line, isn't it? Are you looking for me? I am in the next seat. My shoulder is against yours. You will not find me in stupas, nor in Indian shrine rooms, nor in synagogues, nor in cathedrals, not in masses, nor kirtans, nor in legs winding around your neck, nor in eating nothing but vegetables. When you really look for me, you will see me instantly. You will find me in the tiniest hour of time. Kabir says, "Student, tell me, what is God?" God is the breath inside the breath. And so the predicament between the second and third planes that I'm asking you to consider is that the second has this intense yearning to merge back into the beloved. And as that merging occurs, the next surrender, the next death, if you will, it's not a ripping, it's just a movement into. There is the realization that God has been all of it all along. That final plane is something that includes everything, it excludes nothing. You could call that third plane, and we will for this weekend, awareness. Awareness. See, go back inside yourself, and you sit down so that the trauma of your ego story quiets down just a little bit. And then you begin to feel the awareness, the presence of soul, which is still you and unique. And you're seeing your life unfold. You're seeing your clingings, your shadows, your loves, your passions. You're seeing it all. You're mindfully bringing mindfulness to what is in incarnation. And if you keep going in and saying, but who's that? Who's that? Who am I? What is? Then even in Buddhist anatta, then even the sense of a separate entity turns out to just be more phenomena. You're even thinking of yourself as separate, finely dissolves. And you are indeed back where you started. Would be one way of saying it, although that implies start and back and beginning and end. You've been there all along. That's the bizarre thing. The realization you've been here all the way along. It was like I had a dream and I awoke. Oh! The dream was that I was separate, even as a soul. And then that soul and its separateness all comes into awareness, but as phenomena. As phenomena. And at that moment, you start to appreciate. If you go inward, you begin to appreciate how awareness is awareness. It's not your awareness. It's not my awareness. It's nothing personal. And when you and I rest in awareness, that is the culmination of love. Because you're not even a breath apart. You are the breath within the breath. When people say, may peace be with you, peace cannot be with the ego, except like for the briefest second. Because the ego's made up of stuff that doesn't allow for it. The soul is still moving towards something. Awareness is peace, and phenomena arise. I am a phenomenon in your consciousness at this moment. Just another moment. Just another moment. I guarantee you that within 10 hours this will be gone. And there'll be even the memory of it gone. It'll come back, but it'll be gone. You'll be so busy getting supper that just in cutting the beans, this moment will be gone. Where was it? Oh, I'll never forget this. I hope you will. Because awareness is in the moment. It's not in moldering butterflies of memories of awareness. It's in the moment. It's so bizarre, as we will see this weekend as we keep playing with this, how you can go through time into timelessness. You can go through becoming into being. You can go through meditation of planes of consciousness, of the witness and the deeper witness and the witness of the witness, and back in until there's just, and all of that keeps going in and out and in and out and in and out. And that's an interesting one. Does it ever be all in at the same moment? I don't really know that. Because the way we see manifestations is always from one plane or another. Like the other quote of Anandamayi Ma that I use are the words on one plane speaking about another plane. It's the finger pointing at the moon. And once Paramahansa Yogananda asked Anandamayi Ma to tell him something of her life. Father, she said, there is little to tell. My consciousness has never associated itself with this temporary body. Before I came on earth, Father, I was the same. I grew into womanhood, but still I was the same. When the family in which I had been born made arrangements to have this body married, I was the same. And Father, in front of you now, I am the same. Even afterwards, though the dance of creation changes around me in the hall of eternity, I shall be the same. Can you hear who that is? It's you. That's peace. Do you hear that? That's equanimity. That's peace. Yeah! Ooh! Ah! Just the same. Loss, gain, fame, shame, pleasure, pain, life, death, bloop, 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 bloop. Same. Boy, did you see that world end? Heavy, wasn't it? Whew. Now, see, this is the advanced course. I'm challenging you now to get all three planes going, so that you are honoring the ego and you're playing your part and you're in your role and you're doing it all perfectly. The soul that is running off its karmic tab, well, there goes abuse. There's financial dismal failure. That's good. I needed one of those to fill in that square. Let's see. Comes a Republican administration. I need one of those. Comes a good golf score. I certainly needed one of those. Soul's running off its karma. Interesting, fascinating. And then at the same moment, it's got the yearning, that yearning. But the other part of the soul's business is its relationship to the one. And for the one, there is the play of all this stuff going on within itself. It's all an internal matter. Just souls, egos, stories, planes of consciousness, all within awareness. When you start to work with that ultimate plane, the kinds of lines you use are this 5-line stanza from a Tibetan woman. Don't prolong the past. That's your personal history, by the way. Don't invite the future. How do you know how it's going to come out? Don't alter your innate wakefulness. You don't have to do anything, just be. Don't fear appearances. Phenomena come up, including your actions. It's all phenomena. Nothing more than that. If you can imagine having a lover who unconditionally loves you, just the way you are. You got gas, fine. You got no teeth, fine. Black, white, yellow, brown, fine. Old, young, battered, beautiful, fine. Angry, happy, depressed, fine. God's always here.
Well, if your lover is always here and always got arms open and always wide open and receiving, what's stopping the process? Why aren't you home free? Well, apparently you're not home free because you're a conditional lover, while God's an unconditional lover. And you're saying to God, look, I can really only be with you if you will make it the way I want it. Got through to one of us. It's so horrible, it really is, yes. God, if I were only 20 again, I'll love you. See, once you get into this particular love affair, and you see that the only thing that keeps you from beloved is your own head trips of who you think you are, and who you think you aren't, and how you think it is. A lot of stuff that meant a lot to you before stops meaning so much. I mean, I don't really care if I'm bald as a billiard ball, because God loves me. I used to be so ashamed of all my sexual weirdities. Boy, did I go out of my way to practice duplicity. And you know, now I couldn't care less. It is what it is. And when I look at you, since I'm just looking for God, all I see is God in drag. And you look at me and you say, you weirdo. I say, oh no, God, you won't get me with that. I see through that one too. Because I'm not buying it. Because I am what I am, and you are what you are. What we're talking about here are very subtly varying techniques for working with where you're stuck. One of them is taking the stuckness and using it to see the way in which you are clinging. You just understand that once you feel any suffering at all, it's because you're clinging, and you know that in your head. Suffering, clinging. No clinging, no suffering. So that you get so the minute you start to suffer, you look to see where you're clinging. And you understand that you're trying to cling, as Stephen pointed out, to stuff that is in form, and all form changes and passes away. And Christ makes it very clear, lay not up your treasures where moth and rust doth corrupt. And Buddha says all clinging is suffering. And there we have it. Everybody agrees. So one of those strategies is where the stuff is so real, you work with the reality of it, and you say, yes, I'm suffering, and you start to open around the suffering. Create a little space around the suffering. To see it for what it is, suffering, clinging, so. If you can imagine a picture frame in which there is a painting of a gray cloud, but the painter made the cloud bigger than the frame that he had, she had. So what they did was they cut a little off the edge, and they just put it in the frame, and so all there is gray cloudness, because there's no edge anymore to the cloud, so all you have is gray in a frame. And you look at it and you say, what's that? But if you used either a little bigger frame or painted a little smaller cloud, you'd see that there's a little blue sky around the edge of the cloud, and you say, oh, a cloud. What do you know? All the time I thought the universe was gray. cloud is the grief, the cloud is the self-pity, the cloud are the models, and that little blue sky becomes the space. The meditative techniques are designed to give you that space. And the minute there's that spaciousness, it's just another cloud. You know what clouds do in the sky? They come and they go. Every time I used to get high, I'd come down. Sort of the way of life. You go up, you come down. And the first time I'd come down, I'd think, I've lost it, I've fallen out of grace, I've blown it for this lifetime. And then the next weekend I get high again. And the first 100 times, each time you come down, you think you've blown it again. You've lost it, you're never gonna have it ever again. And then you arrive at a place when you stop clinging to your highs, you stop clinging to your lows. Ah, wow, what ecstasy. I can look into the face of God. Wow, dig this depression. Ooh, I have never seen a depression as bad as this. I don't think anybody could ever get out of this depression. There is a brand of cigarettes put out in India that many of us carried with us, just the box of it. The brand is called Passing Show. It's all just passing show. Highs, lows, depressions. How real do you want it to be? One strategy is you work with it. Working with it is investing it with reality. The other strategy is you put your reality somewhere else and the whole business starts to turn into nothingness. You start to put your reality on your breath. You put your reality in your devotion to God. You put your reality in any of your yogic techniques. And all this other stuff starts to fall into perspective. See, the working with the grief has the pitfall. That is, which is a tantric technique. Working with the grief to get beyond the grief, we're going into it, has the pitfall that it's like a bottomless well and you may never get out of it because you keep feeding on it and feeding on it and feeding on it. I mean, if you thought you cried yesterday, nothing like if we go deeper how you could cry tomorrow. That's the pitfall of that strategy. The pitfall of the other strategy, of course I got grief, oh God. Of course I've got grief, breathing in, breathing out, is that you will push the stuff under prematurely and it will sit inside you like a festering sore, oozing horrible gases that will color everything in your life, always. Want a more ugly description of it, or has that one got you? Two exciting strategies. So what we are doing here, in our little mini sampling of life, is we climb into the stuff until it's real for us. So we start to air it a little bit, open up the vents and the safety valves and get some of the gas out and get the whole thing flowing again. And then we start to change our consciousness direction. And we're starting in the other techniques too. Because if you're really good at the game, you can keep both techniques going all at once. You get closer to God, so baldness is less relevant. But you also don't make believe you got hair when you don't. And you don't make believe it's beautiful if you still think it's not beautiful. And in response to many of you, and many of me, who feel that our hearts aren't open enough, and that we can't afford to open our hearts because everything is going to die that we touch, because anything we open our hearts to is going to die, going to end up in a corruption. The most profound answer to that is you can't afford not to. It's as simple as that. And the minute you appreciate the way in which suffering awakens, I guarded myself for a long time. And I could guard myself by being in this role. And then I couldn't afford it any longer. And I opened up and I fell in love. Most romantic sense. Me, romantic, wow. And I couldn't have it the way I wanted it. And I suffered. And I cried and I raged and so miserable. And at the same moment, something in me was saying, you're alive. It's happening. Good. Sit with it. I tried to manipulate the universe to get it just the way I wanted it, and I couldn't do it. And I don't understate how it hurt. And when you don't get what you want, which is what happens when someone dies you love, when a lover leaves you, when some model you've had isn't functional, I don't say there will not be grief, and there will not be mourning for your loss. And I warn you against prematurely pushing that underground. Allow plenty of time for grief. I tried very quickly to smile and say, oh, it's perfectly okay, it didn't hurt me, oh, I'm fine, because that's who I thought I was supposed to be. But it did hurt, and it kept hurting for a long time. And I had to give it plenty of space. And it's not too small. A lot of people come to me after 6 or 8 months when they've lost a loved one, and they say, I don't understand, I can't get my life going again. I said, you haven't even begun yet. Allow yourself at least 2 years to grieve. Go grieve some more. And then there comes a period where you've just gone through enough, and the space starts to, that little blue sky starts to develop, and if you have a meditative awareness, or just that appreciation, you start to identify with the blue sky instead of the cloud. You flicker it first, and then you start to release. And often in the release, there is a closing of the heart because you don't want to get hurt again. And you've got to allow that. That's still part of the grief reaction. And a lot of you are still holding on to grief from previous hurts. And then comes the time when you start to realize you'd rather be vulnerable and be hurt than be living dead in the dead sense, not in the living sense. And you can't afford it, and you start to open again, and the whole cycle starts again. Until finally, you start to fall in love with love. You start to fall in love with truth. You start to fall in love with that of which form is but a reflection. You start to fall in love with God. You start to fall into love, into yourself. And then there is no coming and there is no going. And then you are on the way to merging with your beloved, and that's, to me, what the game is about. And then dying and living are just dying and living. You know, it says before Satori, there are rivers and mountains. And in the Satori, there are no rivers and there are no mountains. And then after the Satori, there are rivers and mountains, something like that. Well, before Satori, there's dying. There's being born. In the Satori, you're in the formless, there's nothing. And then you finish the cycle, and there is dying and there's being born. But it's all so different. It's just so. And there's finally a place where you can say so with the simplicity of so, without the psychological overlay of, when I say so, does it mean I'm too cold? Does it mean I don't have enough compassion? You can just say so.